The automatic doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel slid open, and David stepped inside. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. He'd been to hundreds of hotels like this one. Luxury was nothing new to him anymore. At 38 years old, David was the CEO of a tech company worth billions. His face had been on magazine covers. His opinions moved stock markets. But today, he was just here for another business conference. David pulled out his phone and checked his schedule while walking through the lobby. He had a keynote speech in 2 hours, then back-to-back meetings until evening. His assistant had already confirmed everything. The suite was ready. His presentation was loaded on the hotel system. Everything was running like clockwork. The way it always did in his carefully organized life. He was about to head toward the elevators when he heard a loud crash behind him. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed through the quiet lobby. David turned around, more out of instinct than concern. A cleaning cart had tipped over near the far wall. Bottles of cleaning supplies were rolling across the polished floor. A woman in a gray uniform was bending down, trying to gather everything quickly. Her hands were shaking. David noticed that other guests were walking past her without a second glance. A couple even seemed annoyed that they had to step around the mess. Something about that bothered him. Maybe it was the way she was hurrying, clearly embarrassed. Maybe it was the slight limp in her step as she bent down. He found himself walking toward her instead of toward the elevators. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. She was older, probably in her late 60s. Her uniform was a bit worn at the edges, and her shoes looked like they'd seen better days. There was something about the way she moved that felt strangely familiar to him, though he couldn't place why. It was like watching someone he'd seen in a dream he couldn't quite remember. David bent down and picked up a spray bottle that had rolled near his feet. The woman looked up, surprised that someone was helping her. Her eyes met his for just a second before she quickly looked away. But in that 1 second, David's entire world stopped. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. The bottle slipped from his hand and hit the floor again, but he didn't notice. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He stared at the woman's face, taking in every detail. The lines around her eyes, the shape of her nose, the small scar on her chin that he remembered from childhood. It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. But it was. "Mom?" The word came out barely above a whisper. The woman froze. Her face went completely pale, like all the blood had drained from it in an instant. She stood up slowly, her hand gripping the cleaning cart for support. For a moment, neither of them moved. The busy hotel lobby seemed to fade away. The sound of conversations, the clicking of heels on marble, the distant ring of the front desk phone, it all became background noise. "David," she finally said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Soft, gentle, but now with a tiredness in it that hadn't been there before. It was really her, Elena. The woman who had taken him in when he was 7 years old. The woman who had raised him, fed him, helped him with homework, taught him right from wrong. The woman he'd called Mom for 11 years before he left for college and somehow shamefully lost touch with over the past 20 years. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. She glanced around the lobby nervously, as if worried someone was watching them. Her hands smoothed down her uniform in a self-conscious gesture that made David's heart break. "What are you doing here?" David asked, though the answer was obvious. She was working here. His mother and his mom was working as a hotel maid. "I work here," Elena said quietly, confirming what he already knew. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I clean the rooms. Have been for about 3 years now." David felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. 3 years. She'd been working this physically demanding job for 3 years. How old was she now? 67. 68. She should be retired. She should be comfortable. She should be anywhere but here, pushing a heavy cleaning cart through a hotel lobby. "Why didn't you call me?" The question came out more desperately than he intended. "Why didn't you tell me you needed help?" Elena looked down at the cleaning supplies scattered on the floor. "You have your own life, David. You're successful. You're important. I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" David's voice cracked. You're not a burden. You're my mother." A hotel manager approached them, looking concerned. "Is everything all right here? Alina, did something happen?" Alina quickly shook her head. "No, sir. Everything's fine. I just knocked over my cart. I'm cleaning it up now." The manager looked at David, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Chen, I apologize for the disturbance. I hope this hasn't inconvenienced you in any way. Alina, please be more careful." David wanted to tell the manager exactly what he thought about that comment, but Alina gave him a pleading look. "Don't make a scene," her eyes said. "Please don't embarrass me at my job." "It's fine," David managed to say through clenched teeth. "Actually, could you give us a moment? This is someone I know." The manager looked surprised but nodded and walked away. Alina immediately started gathering the cleaning supplies again, her movements quick and anxious. "Mom, stop," David said, reaching out to still her hands. "Please, just talk to me for a minute." "Can't," Alina whispered. "I'm on the clock. I have rooms to clean. If I fall behind, I could get written up. I need this job, David." Those words hit him harder than anything else. She needed this job. His mother, who had sacrificed everything for him, needed to clean hotel rooms to survive, while he lived in a penthouse apartment and flew on private jets. She was worried about getting written up for talking to her own son. "What time do you finish?" David asked. Alina hesitated. "I work until 6 today, and I'm coming to see you after you finish. We need to talk." "Really talk?" "David, I don't think." "Please," he interrupted. "I need to understand what happened. I need to know why you're here." Lena looked at him for a long moment. There was so much in her eyes. Love, sadness, shame, and something else he couldn't quite name. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll meet you in the employee parking lot at 6:15. She wrote down her address on a small piece of paper from her uniform pocket. Her handwriting still the same as he remembered from the notes she used to pack in his school lunches. Then she handed it to him, and their fingers touched briefly. Her hands were rough and weathered. Nothing like the soft hands he remembered from his childhood. Alina picked up the last of the cleaning supplies and righted her cart. She gave David one more look, a sad smile on her face, before she turned and pushed the cart toward the service elevator. David watched her go, noticing the slight struggle in her steps, the way she had to use both hands to push the heavy cart, the exhaustion in her shoulders. He stood there in the middle of the hotel lobby for a long time after she disappeared, the piece of paper with her address clutched in his hand. His keynote speech was in less than 2 hours. He had meetings scheduled. He had responsibilities, but none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the woman in the gray uniform who had once been his whole world. And figuring out how everything had gone so terribly wrong, David couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. His keynote speech was a blur. He stood on stage in front of 500 people and talked about innovation and technology. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in a hotel hallway, watching an elderly woman push a cleaning cart. Every few minutes, he'd pull out the piece of paper from his pocket and look at the address. It was on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood he'd never been to. The meetings after his speech were torture. People asked him questions and he answered them, but later he wouldn't remember a single word of any conversation. His assistant, Jennifer, noticed something was wrong. She'd worked with him for 6 years and had never seen him like this. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked during a break between meetings. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," David lied. "Just tired." But he wasn't fine. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. He kept looking at his watch, counting down the hours until 6:15. At 5:30, he couldn't take it anymore. He canceled the rest of his meetings, something he never did, and told Jennifer he was leaving. "But you have the investor dinner at 7, she reminded him. "Cancel it," David said. Something came up. Something important. He walked out of the hotel and got into his car. The driver started to take him toward his usual hotel across town, but David stopped him. "Take me here instead," he said. Handing over the piece of paper with Elena's address, the driver looked at the address and raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that billionaires usually visited. But he didn't ask questions. He just put the address into the GPS and started driving. As they got further from downtown, the buildings got smaller and older. The streets got narrower. David watched the city change outside his window. They passed neighborhoods he'd never seen before, even though he'd lived in this city for years. It was like discovering a whole different world that existed just miles away from his luxury apartment. Finally, they pulled up in front of a small apartment building. It was old, probably built 40 or 50 years ago. The paint was peeling. One of the windows on the first floor was covered with cardboard. A broken bicycle was chained to a fence out front. David felt his stomach drop. "Should I wait, sir?" the driver asked. As David said, "I'll need a ride later." He got out of the car and looked at the building. Alina lived here. His mother lived here. He checked the address again. Apartment to C. He walked up the cracked concrete steps and opened the front door. The lobby smelled like old carpet and something he couldn't identify. The elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it. So he took the stairs to the second floor. Apartment to C was at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was painted a faded blue color. David stood in front of it for a full minute before he could bring himself to knock. His hand was shaking when he finally did. Alina opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting right there. She'd changed out of her work uniform and was wearing simple clothes, a worn sweater and old jeans. Her hair was still damp, like she'd just showered. "Come in," she said quietly. David stepped inside and his heart sank even further. The apartment was tiny. One room served as both the living room and bedroom. He could see a small kitchen area against one wall, barely big enough for one person. A narrow door in the corner probably led to a bathroom. The furniture was old and mismatched. The couch looked like it had come from a thrift store. There was no TV, just a small radio on a shelf. The whole apartment couldn't have been more than 300 square feet, but it was clean. Everything was neat and organized. There were a few plants on the windowsill, trying to bring some life into the space. A stack of library books sat on a small table. Alina had always loved reading. "Sit down," Alina said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll make us some tea." David sat down while Alina moved around the tiny kitchen. He watched her fill a kettle with water and place it on an old electric stove. She pulled out 2 mugs from a cabinet that only held a few dishes. Everything about this place spoke of someone living with the absolute minimum. "I'm sorry it's not much," Alina said, as she waited for the water to boil. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Mom," David's voice was rough. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alina was quiet for a moment. The kettle started to whistle, and she poured the hot water into the mugs. She brought them over to the couch and handed one to David before sitting down beside him. She took a sip of her tea, as if gathering her courage. "Do you remember Roberto?" she finally asked. Of course David remembered. Roberto had been Elena's husband, the man who had been like a father to him. A kind man with a loud laugh who worked as a mechanic and coached Little League on weekends. Roberto had treated David like his own son from day one. "I remember him," David said. Alina nodded, her eyes distant. "After you left for college, things were good for a while. Roberto and I were proud of you. We talked about you all the time. How smart you were. How hard you worked. We knew you were going to do great things." She paused, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. Then about 15 years ago, Roberto started forgetting things. Little things at first. He'd forget where he put his keys. He'd forget appointments. We thought it was just stress from work, but it got worse. He'd forget conversations we'd had an hour before. He got lost driving home from the grocery store one day, even though we'd lived in the same house for 20 years. David felt a cold weight settling in his chest. He knew where this was going. "The doctor told us it was early onset Alzheimer's," Alina continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Roberto was only 52. The doctor said it would progress quickly, and it did. Within a year, he couldn't work anymore. Within 2 years, he didn't recognize our neighbors. Within 3 years, he didn't always recognize me." Tears started rolling down Elena's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I took care of him at home for as long as I could, but it got to the point where I couldn't leave him alone for even a few minutes. He'd wander off. He'd try to cook and forget about it. He fell down the stairs once. I was so scared he'd hurt himself when I wasn't looking, so I had to put him in a care facility, Alina said. A good one, where they could watch him 24 hours a day, where he'd be safe. But David, those places are expensive. So expensive. Our insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. She finally looked at him, her eyes red. I sold our house. I sold the car. I sold the little repair shop Roberto owned. I emptied our savings account. I maxed out every credit card, and it still wasn't enough. The bills just kept coming, month after month after month. For 5 years, I watched my husband forget who I was, and I paid everything I had to keep him comfortable and safe. David felt like he couldn't breathe. All this had been happening, and he'd known nothing about it. He'd been building his company, making his fortune, and his mother had been drowning. Roberto passed away 5 years ago, Elena said softly. In the end, I don't think he was suffering anymore. He'd forgotten everything, even how to be afraid. I held his hand when he died, and I don't know if he knew I was there, but I hope he did. I hope somewhere deep down he knew he wasn't alone. She took another sip of her tea, her hands shaking slightly. After he was gone, I had nothing left. Less than nothing. I had debt. The house was gone. The shop was gone. I was 62 years old, with no savings, no property, and no job. I couldn't even afford to bury him properly. The funeral home gave me a discount, but I'm still paying off that bill. Why didn't you call me? David asked again, his voice breaking. I could have helped. I would have helped. Lena smiled sadly. David, I watched the news. I saw you on TV. I read articles about you online at the library. I saw how successful you'd become. You had this amazing life. You were changing the world. How could I call you and ask for money? How could I burden you with my problems? You're not a burden, David said firmly. You're my mother. You took me in when nobody else wanted me. You fed me. You clothed me. You helped me with my homework every single night. You sat with me in the hospital when I broke my arm. You taught me how to tie a tie. You drove me to college and helped me move into my dorm room. You gave me everything. And you made something of yourself, Alina said. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't want your money, David. I just wanted you to be happy and successful. And you are. That's enough for me. It's not enough for me, David said. Mom, what happened after Roberto died? How did you end up here? Alina looked around the tiny apartment. I had to find work. But I was 62 with no recent job experience. I'd spent the last 5 years as a caregiver, and before that, I'd helped Roberto run the shop. No one wanted to hire me. I applied to dozens of places. Grocery stores, retail shops, restaurants, nothing. Finally, the hotel hired me. They needed cleaning staff, and they didn't care that I was older. The pay isn't great, but it's enough to cover this place and food. I work 50 hours a week most weeks. Sometimes more if they're short-staffed. My knees hurt and my back aches, but I manage. She looked at David with a determined expression. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, sweetheart. I made my choices. I chose to take care of Roberto the best way I could. I chose not to contact you. Those were my decisions. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. David set down his tea mug because his hands were shaking too hard to hold it steady. 20 years. It had been 20 years since he'd seen his mother. At first it had been because he was busy with school. Then it was internships and starting his company. Then it was expanding the business and dealing with investors. There had always been something more urgent, something more important. He'd told himself he'd reach out next month, next year, when things calmed down. But things never calmed down. And slowly, shamefully, he'd just stopped thinking about it as much. He'd convinced himself that Alina was fine. She had her own life and didn't need him anymore. But the truth was, he'd been afraid. Afraid that if he came back, she'd see how much he'd changed. Afraid that she'd be disappointed in the person he'd become. Afraid that he wouldn't fit into her simple life anymore, or that she wouldn't fit into his complicated one. So he'd just stayed away, and the years had piled up until 20 of them had passed without a single visit. I should have called you, David said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have stayed in touch. I got so caught up in my own life that I forgot about the person who made that life possible. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Alina reached out and took his hand. Hers was rough and calloused from years of hard work, but her grip was gentle. "You were living your life, David. That's what you were supposed to do. I never blamed you for that." "But you were struggling," David said. "You were selling everything you owned, working yourself to exhaustion. And I was buying sports cars and penthouse apartments. If I'd just picked up the phone once, just once, you wouldn't have had to go through this alone." Maybe Alina admitted. "But I was also too proud to ask." "That's on me, not you. We both made mistakes, sweetheart. But we're here now. That's what matters."
Nice.
They sat in silence for a while, both of them processing everything that had been said. Outside the window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small apartment. David noticed things he hadn't seen before. The cracks in the ceiling, the worn spots on the carpet, the way the window didn't quite close all the way, letting in a small draft. "How much do you make at the hotel?" David finally asked. Alina hesitated. "David, I don't want—" "Please," he interrupted. "Just tell me." $12 an hour, she said quietly. "After taxes and deductions, I bring home about $1,500 a month. My rent here is $900. That leaves $600 for everything else. Food, utilities, my bus pass, clothes, medical expenses. It's tight, but I make it work." David did the math in his head. $1,500 a month. He spent more than that on restaurants in a week. His watch had cost more than she made in a year. The realization made him feel physically sick. "I'm going to fix this," he said firmly. "David, no," Alina started to protest. "I don't want your charity. I don't want you to feel obligated. It's not charity," David cut her off. "And it's not about obligation. Mom, you gave me a home when I was a scared 7-year-old kid who'd been bounced around foster homes for 2 years. You didn't have to do that. You chose to. You chose me. You worked 2 jobs to make sure I had everything I needed. You helped me apply to colleges. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of you." He squeezed her hand tighter. "So please, let me do this. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you deserve it. Because I love you." Lena's face crumpled and she started crying in earnest now. David pulled her into a hug, and she felt so small and fragile in his arms. When had she gotten so small? He remembered her as strong and capable, always knowing what to do, always taking charge. Now she felt like she might break. "I don't know what to say," Alina whispered against his shoulder. "Say yes," David replied. "Just say yes, and let me help you." Lena pulled back and looked at him. Her eyes were red and tears were still streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her all day. "Yes," she said. "Okay, yes." David felt something loosen in his chest. Something that had been tight and painful since the moment he'd seen her in that hotel lobby. He had no idea how to fix everything that had gone wrong, but he knew one thing for certain. His mother would never push a cleaning cart again. She would never worry about rent or food or whether she could afford to see a doctor. He would make sure of that, no matter what it took. They talked for hours that night, sitting on that old thrift store couch in that tiny apartment. They talked about Roberto and the good times before he got sick. They talked about David's childhood and the memories they both cherished. They talked about the years they'd missed and the time they'd wasted. And slowly, carefully, they started to rebuild the connection that had somehow gotten lost along the way. When David finally left, it was after midnight. Alina walked him to the door and hugged him again. "Come back soon," she said. "Tomorrow," David promised. "I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll start figuring everything out." As he walked down the stairs and out to his waiting car, David pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, lawyers to contact, plans to put in motion. His mother had spent 5 years sacrificing everything for the man she loved, and then 5 more years struggling alone. Those days were over now. David was going to make absolutely certain of that. David didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment, staring out at the city lights, making phone calls. First, he called his lawyer Thomas, waking him up at 1 a.m. "I need you to draw up some documents," David said, without apologizing for the late hour. "A property purchase, a trust fund, and some other things. Can you meet me at 8 tomorrow morning?" Thomas, used to David's intensity, agreed without complaint. Next, David called his financial advisor, his real estate agent, and his personal assistant. By the time the sun came up, he had a plan. Not just any plan, a complete strategy to change his mother's life in a matter of days. At 7 a.m, David drove back to Elena's apartment building. He knocked on her door, and she answered in her hotel uniform, clearly getting ready for work. "David, what are you doing here so early?" Elena looked confused and a little worried. "Call in sick today," David said. "What? I can't do that. I need this job. Mom, trust me, please. Just this once, call in sick. We have things to do today." Elena studied his face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. She called the hotel and told them she wasn't feeling well and couldn't come in. David could hear the manager on the other end of the line, clearly annoyed, warning her that too many sick days could result in termination. When she hung up, she looked anxious. "I've never called in sick before," she said. "Not once in 3 years. It's going to be fine," David assured her. "Now get changed. Wear something comfortable. We're going to be doing a lot of driving today." An hour later, they were in David's car, heading across the city. Elena kept asking where they were going, but David just smiled and told her to be patient. They drove to a neighborhood she'd never been to before. An area with tree-lined streets and beautiful houses with large yards. The car pulled up in front of a charming 2-story house with a blue front door and a small garden. It wasn't a mansion. David had specifically avoided looking at anything too extravagant. But it was beautiful and well-maintained, with a front porch and flower boxes in the windows. "Why are we stopping here?" Elena asked. "Come on," David said, getting out of the car. A woman in a business suit was waiting by the front door. She smiled and shook David's hand, then introduced herself to Elena as Patricia, a real estate agent. "Shall we take a look inside?" Patricia asked, unlocking the door. Elena followed them into the house, still confused. The inside was even lovelier than the outside. Hardwood floors, large windows that let in plenty of natural light, a cozy living room with a fireplace. The kitchen was spacious with modern appliances. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The previous owners took excellent care of it, Patricia was saying. New roof 3 years ago? The heating system was replaced last year. There's a small backyard that's perfect for gardening. The neighborhood is very quiet and safe. There's a grocery store 2 blocks away and a library right around the corner. Elena walked through the rooms in a daze. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter, looked out the window at the backyard, stood in the middle of the largest bedroom, and just stared around her. "David," she said quietly, when they were alone for a moment, "this house must cost a fortune. Why are we here?" David pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside were documents that his lawyer had prepared in record time that morning. He handed them to Elena. "This is yours," he said simply. Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands. She pulled out the papers and started reading. Her eyes went wide as she processed what she was seeing. A property deed, with her name on it. "David, no," she whispered. "This is too much. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," David said firmly. "Mom, look at me." Elena looked up at him, tears already forming in her eyes. "You spent 5 years draining every penny you had to take care of Roberto," David continued. "You spent 3 more years working a job that's destroying your body, living in a tiny apartment that barely keeps you warm. You've sacrificed enough. You've struggled enough. Please, let me do this one thing for you." "But David, a whole house is the least I can do," he interrupted. "I should have been there for you years ago." "I can't change the past, but I can change your future. This house is paid for. It's yours, completely. No mortgage, no rent, nothing. The property taxes and insurance are set up on automatic payment from an account I've established. You'll never have to worry about losing it." Lena clutched the papers to her chest, and started crying. Not just tears, but deep sobbing cries that shook her whole body. David wrapped his arms around her and let her cry. Patricia quietly excused herself to wait outside, giving them privacy. "I don't deserve this," Alina said between sobs. "You deserve this and so much more," David replied. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. Now I'm giving you one. Please say you'll take it." Lena pulled back and looked around the house again. She walked to the window and looked out at the small backyard. There was an old oak tree and some flower beds that needed attention. Her hands pressed against the glass. "There's enough room for a garden," she said softly. "A big one," David agreed. "You can plant whatever you want." Lena turned back to him, wiping her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll take it." "Thank you, David. Thank you so much." They spent the next hour walking through the house again. This time with Alina imagining where she'd put furniture and what colors she might paint the walls. She was smiling more than David had seen her smile in the past 24 hours. It was starting to feel real to her, but David wasn't done yet. Their next stop was at a law office downtown. Thomas, David's lawyer, was waiting for them in a conference room with more documents spread out on the table. "Lena, it's a pleasure to meet you," Thomas said, shaking her hand warmly. "David has told me a lot about you this morning. All good things, I hope," Alina said, trying to smile despite her obvious nervousness about being in a lawyer's office. "All wonderful things," Thomas assured her. He gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit down. We have some paperwork to go through." For the next 2 hours, Thomas explained various documents to Alina. First was the house deed, which he signed officially. Then came something David called a trust fund. Basically, Thomas explained in simple terms, this is an account that will provide you with a monthly income. You'll never have to work again unless you want to. The amount will be more than enough to cover all your living expenses: food, utilities, medical care, entertainment, everything, and still leave you with extra for savings or anything else you might need. Alina looked at the numbers on the paper and gasped. "David, this is more money than I used to make in a year." "Every month?" "Every month," David confirmed. "You'll never have to worry about money again, Mom. Ever." "But what if something happens to you?" Alina asked, worry creeping into her voice. "What if your company has problems?" "The trust is structured so that it's completely separate from my business," Thomas explained. "It's protected and guaranteed. Regardless of what happens with David's company or anything else, your income is secure." There were more papers. Healthcare documents that ensured Alina would have the best medical coverage available. A new bank account set up in her name with money already deposited to cover any immediate needs. Even a credit card with no limit for emergencies. Elena's hands were shaken as she signed each document. "I don't know what to say," she kept repeating. "I just don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," David told her. "Just promise me you'll enjoy it. Promise me you'll live comfortably and stop worrying about every penny." "Promise," Alina whispered. "I promise I'll try." When they finally left the lawyer's office, it was early afternoon. Alina looked exhausted, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in just a few hours. David suggested they get lunch. They went to a quiet restaurant where they could talk. Over sandwiches that Alina barely touched. She kept looking at David with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," she said. "This doesn't feel real." "It's real," David assured her. "And there's one more thing we need to do today." Lena looked alarmed. "More?" "David, you've already done so much. This one's important," David said. "We need to go to the hotel." Lena's face went pale. "The hotel? Why?" "Because you're going to quit," David said simply. "But I called in sick. If I just don't show up anymore, they won't give me a good reference." "What if I need to work again someday?" "You won't," David interrupted gently. "But you're right. You should quit properly. You should walk in there and tell them you're done, and you should do it with your head held high. You don't owe them anything, Mom. You've worked hard for them for 3 years. It's time to leave on your terms." They drove to the Grand Meridian Hotel together. Alina was quiet during the drive, her hands folded in her lap. When they pulled up to the front entrance, she took a deep breath. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "I'll be right there with you," David said. "You're not alone anymore." They walked into the hotel together. David could see Elena's coworkers bustling around, cleaning rooms and pushing carts. A few of them noticed Elena and waved. She waved back, but kept walking toward the manager's office. The manager, Mr. Peterson, looked up from his desk when Elena knocked on the open door. His expression soured when he saw her. "Elena," he said coldly, "you called in sick, but you look fine to me. If you're well enough to be here, you're well enough to work." "You have 6 rooms that need, I'm here to quit," Elena said, her voice stronger than David expected. Mr. Peterson blinked. "What?" "I'm resigning. Effective immediately." Elena placed a piece of paper on his desk. David recognized it as a formal resignation letter that Thomas had prepared that morning, just in case. "You can't just quit without notice," Mr. Peterson sputtered. "That's unprofessional. You'll never work in hospitality again. I'll make sure of it." David stepped forward. "Actually, she can quit whenever she wants. And your threat just now could be considered workplace harassment. I'm sure the hotel's corporate office would be interested to hear about that." Mr. Peterson finally seemed to recognize David. His face went through several shades of red. "Mr. Chen, I didn't realize I wasn't you weren't being respectful to your employee," David finished for him. "My mother has worked here for 3 years. She's been reliable, hardworking, and dedicated. She deserves better than threats and intimidation. Your mother—" Mr. Peterson looked between them, clearly trying to process this information. "My mother," David confirmed, "and she's done working here. Her final paycheck should be ready by the end of the week. Make sure it includes any unused vacation time or sick days. We'll expect it delivered to her new address." Elena removed her name tag and placed it on the desk next to the resignation letter. The gesture felt symbolic, final. She was closing this chapter of her life. As they turned to leave, several of Elena's co-workers had gathered in the hallway. They'd clearly heard what was happening. One woman, Maria, who Elena had mentioned as a friend, stepped forward. "You're really leaving?" Maria asked. "I am," Elena said. "I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye properly." Maria hugged her. "Don't apologize. I'm happy for you. You deserve something better than this place." She lowered her voice. "We all do." Several other workers came forward to hug Elena and wish her well. David watched as his mother said goodbye to people who had been her colleagues and friends for 3 years. He felt a pang of guilt, realizing that she'd had a whole life here that he knew nothing about. When they finally left the hotel, Elena stopped on the sidewalk outside and turned back to look at the building. She stood there for a long moment, just staring at it. "Are you okay?" David asked. "I'm saying goodbye," Elena said softly. 3 years of my life happened in there. It wasn't a good job, and I wasn't happy, but it was something. It was survival. And now it's over." She turned to David with tears in her eyes again, but this time they looked different. Not sad tears, but something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. "I'm free," she whispered. "For the first time in 10 years, I'm actually free. I don't have to worry about Roberto's medical bills anymore. I don't have to worry about rent or food or whether my shoes will last another month. I can just ... breathe." David pulled her into a hug right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw them. "You can do more than breathe, Mom. You can live. Really live. Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, whatever brings you joy, you can do it now." They went back to Elena's apartment so she could start packing her things. There wasn't much a lifetime condensed down to what could fit in a few boxes. Clothes, some books, a few photographs, kitchen supplies. Looking at how little she owned made David's heart ache. "I'll hire movers," David said. "They can pack everything and bring it to your new house." "I can pack my own things," Elena protested, but she sounded tired. "I know you can," David said. "But you don't have to. Let someone else do the heavy lifting for once." Elena looked around the tiny apartment. "I won't miss this place," she admitted. "But it kept me safe when I had nowhere else to go. I guess I should be grateful for that." "You can be grateful and still be happy to leave," David said. "Both things can be true." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking and planning. David showed Elena pictures of furniture on his phone, asking what style she liked. They discussed paint colors for the bedrooms. Alina mentioned that she'd always wanted a comfortable reading chair by a window, and David immediately ordered one on his phone, along with a floor lamp and a bookshelf. "You don't have to buy everything today," Alina laughed. "Why not?" David grinned. "I have 20 years of birthdays and holidays to make up for." As the sun started to set, they ordered pizza and ate it sitting on Elena's old couch for the last time. They talked about memories from when David was young at the time he won the science fair. The camping trip where they'd gotten lost, his high school graduation. Good memories that David had almost forgotten in the rush of building his business and his life. "I missed you," Elena said suddenly, her voice quiet. "All these years, even when I was busy with Roberto, even when I was working and exhausted, I missed you. I'd see fathers and sons together, or I'd hear someone mention their kids visiting and it would hurt. But I was proud of you too, so proud. I just wanted you to know that." "I missed you too," David admitted. "I told myself I was too busy, that I'd call next week or next month. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that I'd changed too much, that I wouldn't fit into your life anymore, or you wouldn't fit into mine." "I was an idiot. You're a human," Elena corrected. "We all make mistakes, David. What matters is that we fix them when we can." David looked at his mother, really looked at her. She looked tired, older than her years, worn down by life. But there was something new in her eyes now, too. A spark that hadn't been there yesterday. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "Tomorrow, we'll start moving you into the house," David said. "We'll take it slow, get you settled. And then we're going to have a long talk about what you want to do with the rest of your life. Travel? Hobbies? Volunteering? Whatever it is, we'll make it happen." Alina smiled. "I haven't thought about what I want in so long," she admitted. "I've been in survival mode for so long that I forgot there could be anything else." "Well, start thinking," David said, "because your life is about to get a lot bigger." That night, when David finally went back to his own apartment, he felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the emotional weight of the past 2 days. He'd found his mother again. More importantly, he'd found a way to give back even a fraction of what she'd given him. He stood by his window, looking out at the city lights, and made himself a promise. He would never lose touch with her again. No matter how busy he got, no matter what happened with his business, Alina would always be a priority. He'd already failed her once. He wouldn't do it again. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Alina. "Thank you for today. Thank you for everything. I love you." David smiled and typed back, "I love you too, Mom. This is just the beginning." And it was. The beginning of making things right. The beginning of rebuilding what they'd lost. The beginning of giving Alina the life she deserved.